The following photos you'll see in this vignette are part of the Manuel R. Bustamante photograph collection entrenched in the Cuban Heritage Collection at the University of Miami. Cuba, after the War of 1898, saw itself being taken over by the United States, if not in name, then at least in practice. American investors bought up huge tracts of land and invested in the railroads, utilities, the industry, by and large taking over most of what was worthwhile owning in Cuba, leaving a great deal of poverty amongst the rural people. And this vignette here aims to show a glimpse of what life was like in rural Cuba during the period 1900 to 1930, and also show the contrast between the rich and the poor. Here's a view of the Buena Vista Fruit Company's nursery between 1900 and 1930, and these were very, very large estates employing quite a number of people. Here's a photo of a sugar plantation, one of the probably hundreds that were for sale in the early 1900s. On the back of this is written a fair sample of beautiful farms which are for sale within a radius of 50 miles from Havana. Farms like these must be sold to settle up estates. Settled one is standing in a field. And this, of course, is one of those cases of a farmer that has been unable to refinance his loans and has lost his property to the bank. And many of these loans eventually ended up in U.S. banks, and many of these banks sold these properties at great profits. And here we see a sugar mill, a sugar refinery in Cardenas. They had a railroad leading right into the town of Cardenas, which of course assured the sugar refinery a steady supply of sugar cane during the harvest. Here's a citrus nursery, Consolacion del Sur in Cuba in 1919. You can see the white overseer and the farm laborer probably planting a young citrus sapling. And here we see a farm worker in front of a papaya tree with some rather nicely sized papaya fruits. Tobacco was a very important aspect of Cuba's economy, and of course it still is today. Here we see a tobacco field under a shade screen, shading the plants from the hot Cuban sun. Some farm workers are either cleaning or harvesting there. The poverty in the rural areas is well illustrated by the houses that the farmhands they lived in. This here shows a straw-thatched home with a family standing outside by a stone fence, which is probably built from stones collected from the fields. The next house here is also described as one of the poor bohíos belonging to a poor family. It is notably sad that this type of dwelling is common throughout Central and South America even today. Here is a man on a horseback outside of Poor Bohío between 1900 and 1905. And one can well imagine what it would be like to have to live in a house like this. This here is one of the better rural homes from this period. Note the nice carriage outside. It's not known if it belonged to the owner of the house, but it does say on the back that this is further along. You'll see more pretentious dwellings, eminently cool and comfortable and fitted with modern conveniences. Flowers and shrubs, rare orchids and palms are available alike to the rich and to the poor for beautifying the home. This was a house built by one of the many poor farmers from the U.S. who came to the new colony, as they called Cuba. The house has canvas walls and a roof constructed with palm leaves and corrugated steel. Notation on the back says, Canet, Cuba, house made of canvas with palm roof, inhabited by Reich, an American Boston boy. I don't think this guy, he quite made it. It doesn't look like it to me. Here's another house owned by a Yankee, and by the looks of this one, I don't think he struck it rich either. Here's a road running through a small village. The car in the photo would no doubt be a dream for an antique car collector to own. Here comes the Yanks, here comes the Yanks, hang on to your wallets. Colonists on board Curaíba between 1898 and 1902. Annotated on the back of the photo is U.S. colonists en route to La Gloria landing in Cuba shortly after the war. Note the use of the word colonists, somewhat pretentious, but it does indicate exactly what plans that the United States had for Cuba. Here's a good view of La Gloria, the town that was built by the Americans. This is from 1914. Note the neat fence and the typical U.S. style house construction. And here's a local market, a small rural market. These were important places to gather and exchange information and news, in addition to selling their produce and handicrafts. Oxen were used extensively in rural Cuba, even in the cities for that matter. This shows a cart, ox cart, with stakes on the side, such as is typically used for hauling sugar cane. Probably photographed in front of the estate house. Here's another cart with a single ox in front, hauling a barrel filled with some kind of liquid, and a couple of nifty guys standing there on the side posing. There's two oxen down by some port somewhere, very, very heavy oxen, and note the heavy yoke they have, and the rope going through their noses, pobrecitas, but they seem to be very patient and taking it quite easy there. And the plowing was also extensively done with oxen. It's interesting to note the type of plow they're using. This type of plow was used 2,000 years ago in Europe and gradually developed into more modern versions, but it is unusual to note that it's still being used even after 1900 in Cuba. American inventions eventually made their way into Cuba. Here's a wheel plow, and there is a description following this here. On the back it says, "This scene is what he sees very often now, handsome teams and modern machinery that do things with the soil undreamt of by him." and this is from June 1905. And here again is even more modern American technology that reached into Cuba, a steam tractor, and plowing a field. And of course, here you can see that the soil is being quite well turned over. It's using a much more powerful and more modern plow. The following photo shows a contrast between the rich and the poor in Cuba between 1900 and up until the revolution in 1959. Large houses, estates, etc. were built, and this one here, for example, is the Rosario estate of some fame in Cuba, one of the best there was, according to what was written on the back of the. Yeah, we see the presidential palace, the one that Gerardo Machado, of course, would move into, and the next one here, and last but not least, a little piece of Canadiana history here, the Royal Bank of Canada.
Yo soy un negro sincero, de a donde crece la palma. Yo soy un negro sincero, de a donde crece la palma. Y antes de morir me quiero.
I suppose it's fairly appropriate to show the statue of Christopher Colon, or Christopher Columbus, as they call him in North America, as the last photo in this collection here, because he was a fellow who started all the trouble some 462 years earlier. The statue was removed from Colon Park in Havana and erected in the patio of the presidential palace in October 1924. Gerardo Machado had just been elected to his first term as president. His presidency lasted until 1933, and a vicious and corrupt regime he developed set the pattern for the next 29 years, until the Cuban Revolution ousted Batista and put an end to centuries of inequality and exploitation. While no one can say that life in Cuba today is utopic, it is without doubt far more egalitarian and fair than it ever was since the day Colon first reconnoitered the northeastern coast of the island in 1492. The legacy of war, violence, slavery, racism, corruption, and colonial exploitation is not an admirable heritage to look back upon. Cuba will not be completely free until their greedy neighbors just 90 miles to the north recognize Cuba's right to exist and freedom to develop its own way of life without coercion or economic pressure tactics by political and economic interests that would like to turn the clock back to the time where this vignette ends. It is a great mark of shame on the developed world, and especially on the United States, that the indigenous and the poor people in the rest of Latin America have yet to be given an opportunity to lift themselves above the grinding poverty and brutal exploitation they have suffered for hundreds of years.